the biggest complaint people have with this car was that it was not a 911. When 911 is your big brother, you know, that's a lot to live up to. But this thing is really pretty amazing. Welcome to that episode of Jay Leno's Garage. This week we're featuring Porsche, and it's the 25th anniversary of the Boxster. This is the newest model here. Boxster, 25 years. We'll learn more about it in just a second. You know, these are fascinating cars. I saw the concept back in '93 at the Detroit Auto Show. And I went to the auto show, I looked at it and thought, oh, great looking car. And I said, can you pop through, let me see the engine? The guy goes, well, you can't see the engine. I go, why? It's mid-engine, it's underneath. Well, how do you get to the engine? Well, you got to put it up on a lift. And I said, wow, that's ridiculous. Just the idea of having a car, I couldn't see the engine, it just made me furious. I've never even driven a Boxster. This will be my very first time. But of course, since that time, almost all manufacturers now have an engine you can't see. My P1 McLaren, you can't see the engine in that. And engine becomes so good now, you're not changing plugs, you're not doing those kind of things other than just fluids. So they were a bit ahead of their time, I guess you could say. But at the time, it seemed ridiculous to me. So I just had no interest in these. And I'm going to drive one the very first time today. This new model, although it looks similar, has just about twice the horsepower of this model here. And I was fascinated to learn that both of these cars were designed by the same gentleman. Let's bring a man in who knows a lot more about Porsche than I do. Luke Van de Sandy. Luke, come on in. Good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
See, whenever I have Porsche on, I can't make any mistakes, and I make a lot of mistakes. If you watch this website, you know that. So I bring in a guy who really knows this. See, I was fascinated that the same guy has designed both of these. That's unusual for designers to stay at the same place for 25 years, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Designers do tend to bounce around from company to company and from position to position. Grant Larson joined the company in the late 80s, and this was one of his first projects. The car that we're looking at today in conjunction with that, the Boxster 25 years, is a special edition, a limited production car, and he's now responsible for designing our special edition cars among a few other different projects. And so what's really kind of remarkable is that we have two products that have a through line from his start with the company to present day.
And it's got a manual gearbox, which is nice to see.
6-speed.
6-speed and 394 horsepower. And this is what, 201?
201, yeah.
Okay, so just about double the horsepower.
Yeah.
Obviously larger wheels, larger brakes, but it's really just constantly refining this model. And it's a little bit bigger, but not that much bigger.
Yeah, about 3 inches longer.
Right.
You gain most of that in the wheelbase. It's actually slightly lower, if you can believe it, and then just a little bit wider, about an inch wider. But dimensionally, you know, the two cars, they haven't changed that much.
And it's really sort of a smaller version of the GT3. We've got 100 less horsepower than the GT3.
Yeah, a little less horsepower.
But it's still 400 horsepower. It's pretty incredible. And this is a true mid-engine, isn't it? As opposed to 911 is a rear-engine car, meaning the engine is either on the axle or behind the axle. Whereas this is, theoretically, this would probably be a better balanced car, wouldn't it, almost?
Yeah, absolutely. The weight is biased toward the center of the car versus the rear. That creates a very balanced driving experience, really good for canyon driving here in Los Angeles, kind of a perfect car for that environment, and really just a joy to drive in tight roads and in, you know, those narrow spaces.
I know, and this car has a whole different fan base than the 911 group. I mean, the guys that just go nuts for this as much as 911 guys go nuts for 911, you know. And I just find that interesting. And it's almost as quick, it's almost as fast as the top of the line 911, isn't it?
This car does 0 to 60 with the manual transmission in the low 4 seconds. It's 4.3 seconds, which is amazing when you consider that you know, that's quite a distance from the predecessor model from the original. And then if you wanted to get with the PDK as well with our dual clutch automatic, then it gets into the high 3s, which really that's getting into to pretty serious acceleration territory.
Man, I was reading the production number. They've done almost almost 400,000 of these Boxsters, haven't they?
Yeah, and through last year in the U.S., we had 125,000 or thereabouts. So we account for, a little more than a third. Boxster's popular in the U.S.
Okay. And this is a limited edition model, obviously. We're doing about 1,200 of these, something like that?
Yeah, 1,250 limited production. That's global. So we'll have a share of those here in the U.S., but it's a really special car. You won't really see too many of these out on the road.
Are Porsches all world cars now, in the sense that the one I get in Germany is power-wise, everything else-wise, equal to the one I get in America?
The power generally is the same. The areas where you see differences are pretty minor, and actually we can take a look at a couple of them. For example, in the European market, we have clear side markers compared to the amber side markers in the U.S. market, little things like that.
Yeah, but performance-wise, because that always used to be the thing. No, I'm going to go to Europe and get a Euro spec because it's got 80 more horsepower, 100, whatever it might be. But these days, with engineering and science and everything else, you can design world cars.
Absolutely, and even little things. Some other car companies sometimes give a different brake setup for the U.S. market, something that tends to cut back on brake dust reduction. But the trade-off is that it has a degradation in braking performance, and that's one of the cool things about Porsche is that you get the same brakes despite being in the U.S. market, and that's preservation of driving feel and of braking feel that we really like.
Yeah, I read that one major manufacturer was on the J.D. Power list, was down in whatever the ratings is, and because of the brakes, which you think, oh gosh, the brakes aren't as good. Well, no, they would just put too much brake dust on the wheel, and people didn't like to have to clean them. Shut up! If you can't clean your wheels yourself, please. But the idea that you would knock it down a level or two just because it's more brake dust, but it actually stops better. That's so annoying to me. That's what annoys me about a lot of these surveys sometimes. What else have we got here?
This car, some of the interesting things about it are that it's meant to be an homage to the 1993 concept car. So we've got GT silver and a red leather interior, something that pays tribute, just like this car does, to the concept. This car's Arctic silver, I think, with red leather. So we have a little bit of a difference in the naming of the paint color, but the aesthetics are the same. And the concept car that you saw had gold accents in the front and in various parts of the vehicle. So we have an acknowledgement of that in the air intakes on the side, in the wheels, in the front intake, in the front fascia of the car, all in what we call neodyme, as a throwback to the concept car.
And all the Boxster 25s are this color? Or no?
So you can get them in 3 different colors. You can get them in white, you can get them in black, or you can get them in GT silver. But it's a very limited selection, specifically so that it's reference to the origins of the Boxster.
What size wheels and tires? Same front and back?
Yeah, 20-inch in the front and in the rear. And this car is actually based on the Boxster GTS 4-liter. So that's why you have that 4-liter motor, naturally aspirated, revs to 7,800 RPM, really spirited car to drive. And as a result of this being based on that model, you also have a lot of standard performance features. The manual transmission has a mechanically locking rear differential. The PDK has an electronically controlled rear differential. The chassis sits a little bit lower than a standard Boxster. It lowers by 10 millimeters. You can optionally choose to lower by another 10 for an even sportier setup. The car has a standard sport exhaust, and then something we call the Sport Chrono package that lets you choose between different drive modes. So from the beginning to end, it's a very complete package that offers really almost everything that we can put onto it from a performance perspective. The only option that this car doesn't have that you could configure it with for additional performance, you were talking about brake dust, is ceramic brakes. So we offer a ceramic composite brake, and that cuts down on brake dust, reduces unsprung weight, adds a little bit of cost, but has a performance benefit to the vehicle.
And this is basically the same engine as the GT3, but detuned, is it fair to say, or no?
So it's actually not.
It's not, okay.
No, actually, this is a separate engine.
But it's separate.
Well, it's a completely reasonable guess to take, though, because both of them have 4-liter flat sixes, both are naturally aspirated, but this is actually a separate engine. I think a lot of people don't realize that we have 2 different 4-liter flat six motors.
It's funny to watch. What was it originally, 2.5 liter?
Yeah, 2.5.
The first year, okay. And just to watch it get bigger and bigger. And 4 to 5 liters seems to be about the standard now, almost for all engines. McLaren, everybody, that seems to be, because America used to have 8 liter, you had Vipers and 6.3s and everything else. Now 4 liters seems to be the place to go. You know, it's so funny, the stuff that is I used to consider so exotic is just commonplace. Like my 63 twin cam, you know, it just seemed, that's like a base model now. How engines have gotten so good. That's stuff you would expect to be on a high-end model. Well, I'm anxious to try it. What else? Anything else we need here?
So one of the differences that we have between these two, because this car is based on the GTS 4-liter model, is a separated exhaust. And actually one of the most visually interesting and unique things about the Boxster when it first launched was that central exhaust, something that had a better efficiency in terms of the way that the exhaust traveled from the engine all the way to the end of the tailpipe. So now we have a separated exhaust specifically on the 4-liter models, which is a little bit of a deviation from history, but something that stands to separate the two of them, along with the badging, of course, that shows Boxster 25.
The thing that's interesting to me from the back, this looks cleaner and more aerodynamic. Is this more aerodynamic than that one? I mean, sometimes aerodynamics play tricks on you. What you think is aerodynamic is not. Like you think a Countach would be aerodynamic, but it's actually a brick. And this seems like air would flow over it smoother, but maybe all of this is here for a reason, and it's probably aerodynamics in it.
Everything on the car is functional, all the way down to little touches like the spoiler here that raises depending on your speed, and something that existed on the original model as well, that we had that active spoiler that raised, and that's something that's existed on the Boxster since the beginning. But yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, aerodynamics is always a big function of, or a big focus of what we're looking at, especially with the GT3 that you drove just a few weeks ago, and similarly in this car, something that we pay a lot of attention to.
The thing I like about the Porsche is it's pretty timeless. I mean, this still looks like a clean, fresh design. I think you could introduce this car tomorrow and it would still look current. There's nothing old-fashioned or kitschy about it. It doesn't have any tricks or illusions, you know?
Well, that's one of the best things about Porsches, in my opinion at least, is that they continue to get better with age. You look back at them and they continue to be appealing. They really do, you know, wear their style very well, you know, a few years and a few decades and even longer down the road.
I mean, some cars just look like their decade, you know, the velour upholstery. That's the 80s, I can tell. Like, but this still looks current and it still looks sharp and up to date. Very nice. And obviously you have your trunk in the front. Should we take a look at that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Okay, I'm right down here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how much room is in this.
It's surprisingly practical, and then you have the compartment in the rear as well.
Well, it's deep.
Yeah, you can actually fit 2 carry-on suitcases in that comfortably, and then have, you know, even space for a little bit on top. It's surprisingly practical, actually.
Now, how do you reach this?
You have to remove the plastic cover here. These pieces come off, and then that whole part comes up, and then that's what you have access to for your windshield wiper fluid and a couple of other
brake
things.
Fluid, everything else. Okay.
But you know what's interesting about the Boxster, and I think something that people sometimes forget about, is how practical they are beyond the front compartment. You actually have a secondary storage compartment in the rear as well, and that's big enough itself to put yet another suitcase in. So,
and where is that?
Just around here at the back. If you look at the same switch area that we were popping before.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, you can actually store quite a bit. Not big enough for golf clubs, but big enough for a weekend away for sure.
Well, if you play miniature golf, maybe. And that's oil and obviously, what's this, water? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Still can't see the engine. It makes me laugh. Well, very good. Obviously, this is something that it's so simple, yet it's amazing that it really takes the wind buffeting out of it, doesn't it? It makes this my wife calls these "ow my hair" kind of cars because we drive around the hair goes. But you put this up.
It's fixed.
Oh, it is fixed. Okay, it doesn't move. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, very cool.
Yeah, the whole thing's really simple. It's fixed. You have a switch to operate the roof, and otherwise you just get in the car and drive. Manual transmission, very analog car, you know, not terribly complicated.
Right.
Kind of similar to the GT3 that you drove just a little while ago.
Right.
That
That's the one thing I like the fact that I get in the GT3, and obviously if you own it, you're going to memorize it. But just the fact, everything falls readily to hand. You go, I see. There we go. This radio, boom. It's not one of these. What? I mean, I drive stuff where I pull off. How do I turn off the radio? I have to pull off the road. I have to read it. You know, it's very simple. Very nice. Well, can we take it for a spin?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Let's give it a shot. All right. It's hard to believe I've never driven one of these. I told you, when I told that story about going to the auto show in '93, I was so offended that you couldn't even see the engine. I don't know, it just annoyed me so much I never had any interest in this car. But I have to admit, it feels quite good. And you know, this is something you don't really see anymore. Normally aspirated car, you know, no turbocharged, no superchargers. 6-speed manual gearbox, rear-wheel drive only. I love that. I mean, I like 4-wheel drive. It's great. I like to hang the tail out a little bit once in a while, you know, and kind of have some fun with the thing. The thing that always strikes you about a Porsche is the build quality. I mean, it's amazing. Oh, I see. It's got the start, shut off deal. Ah, now it sounds like a Porsche. There we go. The Revolution was almost $8 grand. Yeah, very nice. And like all modern cars, you've got a couple of choices here of modes. You got economy, you've got the engine start, stop, shut off deal. You know, at stoplights, you got Sport and Sport Plus. Every car, I just keep it in Sport Plus all the time. And it's $8 grand. There's almost a turbine-like smoothness to this engine. It really, it doesn't get. There's no vibration at all, just pure rev all the way to $8 grand. When you realize this is about half the price of the GT3, and all you're sacrificing really is about 100 horsepower and maybe a couple of hundred revolutions on the tachometer, and it's a full convertible, which is great. You know, living in California, there's nothing like an open car. If you like to get your vitamin D naturally, this is the best way to do it. Fit and finish are exemplary. I mean, that's sort of a given with Porsche, of course. I love the throttle response. Gearbox excellent. When I was growing up, if I ever had a gripe against Porsche, the fact that you didn't get as much horsepower as you could get in some other vehicles. I mean, you got exemplary handling and such. Braking is always good, but you always just seem to be down on horsepower. But those days, I guess, are gone forever. I mean, this thing is 400 horsepower, and it's fairly light as far as sports cars go. Again, as I said, mid-engine, so the balance is 50-50, which is impressive. And it's rear-wheel drive, which is what I like. I'm trying to find some reason to dislike it, but I can't. It's a great sports car. I think the biggest complaint people had with this car was that it was not a 911. When 911 is your big brother, you know, that's a lot to live up to. But this thing is really pretty amazing. You know, it's a cool, cloudy day here in California, but I got the top down, I got the heated seats, I got the heater going. It doesn't get any better than this. Nice throaty 4-liter engine. Well, you put it in Sport Plus, you can really feel the difference. generation Boxster that my buddy Steve has. It's a very clean design. And you know, you can get those in the $15,000 range. And the nice thing about Porsche is most people take care of them. I don't see a lot that are just beaten down. You know, I can't help but wonder if Porsche was invented today, they would have started with this, a complete mid-engine package rather than rear end. So in some ways, this might even be more advanced than the 911. I know that'll probably cause a lot of controversy, and I could be wrong, I don't know. But when you start with a mid-engine design, you don't have to make a lot of compromises because you've got a 50-50 balance, you know? What Porsche has done with the 911 is truly remarkable, because on paper it was a kind of setup that really wasn't supposed to be that successful. But of course, they managed to make it so. Clean sheet of paper, you always kind of start with a mid-engine like this, and then, you know, work your way forward and backward. I contend if you put somebody in this car blindfolded and told them it was a 911, I think they would agree with you. Brakes are incredible. You know, for the last week or two, I've been testing my own cars, so when I get something that has real brakes, it's like a revelation. Oh my God. Now, I grew up in the era when you'd slow down by using the transmission. You downshift a gear and then let the clutch out to slow you down a little bit so you didn't wear too hard on your brakes. But of course, those days are gone forever. Brakes now are so incredible. It's a real Porsche. Okay, this is what living in California is all about. 2-lane road, no traffic, and a brand new Porsche. It's not mine. Now, no matter what kind of car you have, it's all about how it makes you feel, you know? I drive plenty of cars that have a lot of horsepower, but they just don't feel planted, or they go wide and turns, and you know, just there's always something. This is such a nicely balanced package. You know, you drive this car and you realize it's a combination of 25 years of experience, 25 years of honing and polishing, until you got something that's just about perfect. I would never call any car perfect because there's always room for improvement. But just when you think Porsche has reached the end of their sort of development, they always come up with something lighter, something stronger, something faster. You know, sometimes the automotive world, we get a little snobby, you know, you go, I don't want any Porsche unless it's a 911, you know. You just sort of, you know, well, maybe I do. I don't know, nobody else does that. But I always used to think of the Boxster as not quite a 911. And I think that's totally wrong. I mean, this is a real Porsche through and through. It handles, it stops. It's incredibly fast. I think top speed is what, 183, 184? I mean, yeah. And it handles so fantastic. It is such a wonderful car to drive. It's pleasant, everything works. You know, it's a cool day. I got the heated seats on. It's fantastic. And that sound it makes when it hits 8 grand is just so fantastic. It's just the right amount of decibels. Not too loud, not too quiet. Unlike any other Porsche, you could drive this thing every day. Commute to work, do what you have to do. Eminently practical car. Well, pretty practical. I'm just thinking of stuff to tell the spouse. I don't think there are many cars that hold their value as well as Porsche. You know, I know guys that buy these things, they keep them 4 or 5 years, and you sell them for more money, or they sell them for about the same money. And they don't depreciate a whole lot. You know, when the Cobra first came out, it had a Ford 260, and then they went to the 289. And maybe that might be an interesting analogy. 260 was as fast as the 289, but just as satisfying to drive. So maybe that is an analogy, or maybe this analogy is too old for most people watching this website, but those are old cars. But I'm an old guy, so hey, do what you know. That's what I say. And this car is what, about a little less than 100 grand out the door, which is a tremendous amount of money. But like I always say to people, price each individual part and then put it together and see how much. It'll probably cost you $500,000. See, that's the way you justify it. You constantly have to think of ways to justify it to the spouse. Honey, if we bought each part of it, it would be, you see, it's cheaper than that. But whatever works, just get yourself one. And I'm sure every Porsche file knows why it's called a Boxster motor, because the connecting rods of the pistons oppose each other like the arms of a boxer. You know, I hear people say, oh, they call it that because the engine looks like it fit in a box, or it's flat like a box. And no, it's none of that. It's the fact that it's supposed to look like this, you know, like a boxer's arms outstretched. I'm sure most enthusiasts know that, but a lot of people don't, so another useless fact. So what you're looking at is 25 years of evolution, and as you can tell, Porsche has not been sitting on its hands. This is an amazing instrument that's just been fine-tuned and honed to pretty close to perfection. You never say perfection because there's always room for improvement, but anytime you can get to 8 grand by going like this, see you next week!
Mm-hmm.